I never thought the most painful moment of my life would happen on the day I was supposed to be the happiest father in the room. I always imagined my daughter Emily's wedding day the same way. I would be standing in the front row, trying not to cry, while pretending I had something in my eye. I would watch her walk down the aisle. Remember the little girl who used to wear oversized rain boots in the summer because she thought they made her look like a superhero, and I would somehow survive the moment without completely falling apart. That was the picture I had carried in my head for years. But life has a strange way of taking the pictures we build and tearing them apart without warning. I got to the venue almost 45 minutes early that morning. That was not unusual for me. I have always been the type of person who gets somewhere early because I hate making people wait. The wedding was being held at a beautiful country club outside the city, sitting on top of a hill with large white columns and flower gardens stretching around the building. Everything looked expensive, really expensive. White roses lined the stone walkway. Crystal decorations sparkled in the sunlight. Valets were helping guests at the entrance. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out. My hands were resting on a small navy blue gift box sitting in the passenger seat beside me. I stared at it and smiled. I had waited years to give Emily what was inside that box. Years. I picked it up carefully, almost like it was fragile glass, and stepped out of the car. I looked down at my suit and brushed imaginary dust off my jacket. I was nervous, not because I was giving a speech, not because of meeting guests. I was nervous because being a father does not stop when your kid grows up. You still worry. You still hope they are happy. You still feel like protecting them even when they no longer need you to. I walked toward the entrance and smiled at the young woman standing at the reception table. "Good morning," I said. "Michael Carter." She looked down at a clipboard. Her smile stayed there, but it changed slightly. Just slightly. The kind of smile people give when they suddenly become uncomfortable. "One moment, sir." She looked around and waved over another employee wearing a black uniform. "Can you help Mr. Carter?" she asked. The man nodded. "Of course. Right this way." I smiled and followed him. I assumed Emily had planned something. Maybe a surprise family photo. Maybe she wanted me somewhere before guests arrived. Emily always loved surprises growing up. On Christmas mornings, she used to wake me up at 6 in the morning because she could never wait to open presents. I followed the employee through the lobby, then through another hallway, then through double doors. I frowned slightly. This did not lead toward the ceremony room. We passed storage areas, supply closets, service carts. Then suddenly I smelled garlic and butter and fresh bread. My steps slowed. Wait a minute. We were entering the kitchen area. Staff members moved around carrying trays and checking food orders. Cooks stood near stainless steel counters preparing dishes. Steam rose from large pots. I looked around in confusion. The employee stopped and pointed toward a small seating area near the back wall. "You can wait here, sir." I blinked at him. "Wait here." He nodded. "Yes, sir." I looked around again, certain I misunderstood something. I think there may be some mistake. "I'm Emily Carter's father." His expression looked uncomfortable again. "I was just told to bring you here." I stared at him for a few seconds. He gave me an awkward smile before walking away quickly. I stood there holding the gift box in my hands. I honestly thought maybe there had been some kind of mix-up. Maybe someone misunderstood instructions. Maybe Emily had arranged something else, and people were confused. I looked toward the kitchen entrance, expecting someone to come fix it any second. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nobody came. Staff members walked by carrying trays and barely looked at me. I sat down slowly in one of the chairs near the wall. My fingers tightened around the little gift box. Something felt wrong now. Really wrong. I pulled my phone out and checked for messages from Emily. Nothing. I checked again. Still nothing. Then I heard voices nearby. I recognized one immediately. Emily. I smiled automatically and stood up halfway from my chair. But then I stopped. She was standing just outside the kitchen entrance with 2 bridesmaids. I could not see them clearly from where I sat, but I could hear them. One of her friends laughed softly and said, "Wait, seriously? Your dad is already here?" Emily let out a small, nervous laugh. Then she said words that felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with their bare hands. "Better if nobody knows he is my dad." Everything inside me suddenly went quiet. I did not move. I did not breathe. I just sat there staring straight ahead while the sounds around me disappeared. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. My brain tried to protect me from what my ears had just heard. Maybe she said something else. Maybe I missed a word. Maybe there was some joke I did not understand. Emily had to mean something else. She had to. But then one of the bridesmaids laughed softly and said, "Emily, stop. That is terrible." Emily let out another small laugh. Except this one sounded nervous. "I am serious," she said quietly. "Look at this place." Ryan's family invited people from his company, investors, people I have never even met before. I just do not want questions today. Questions. I sat there staring at the floor tiles while that word repeated in my head. Questions. Was that what I had become? A question? Not a father. Not the man who spent 28 years raising her. Not the guy who worked every holiday and every weekend shift for years because bills had to get paid. Just a question somebody might ask. I could hear one of her friends lowering her voice. "Emily, he is your father." Emily answered immediately. Too quickly. Like she had already had this conversation with herself before. "Can we please not do this right now?" Then I heard heels clicking away across the hallway. Silence followed. I sat perfectly still. Around me, the kitchen kept moving like nothing had happened. Someone called out an order. Plates clattered together. A cook asked another employee where the salad dressing had gone. Life continued while mine felt like it had stopped moving. I looked down and realized my hand was squeezing the little navy blue gift box so tightly my fingers had turned white. I slowly loosened my grip. I remember thinking something strange in that moment. I was not angry. Not yet. I think pain comes first. Anger shows up later. Pain arrives quietly. It sits beside you and makes your chest feel heavy. I looked toward the kitchen in trance again. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out immediately. Just leave. Get in my car and disappear before anyone saw me. I imagined driving home, hanging my suit back in the closet, putting the gift box away somewhere nobody would find it. I imagined Emily calling later asking where I went. I imagined not answering. But then another memory appeared in my head. Emily at 8 years old, standing in our driveway after falling off her bike. Tears running down her face. Tiny hands shaking. "Dad, do not leave," she had said because she thought I was going back inside for something. I remember kneeling beside her and saying, "I am right here, kiddo. I'm not going anywhere." I closed my eyes for a second. Funny how your mind does that. It reaches backward when your heart starts breaking. A voice suddenly interrupted my thoughts. "Sir," I looked up. A young kitchen employee stood beside me holding a tray of water glasses. He looked maybe 20 years old. "Would you like some water?" I blinked a few times. "Oh, sure. Thank you." He handed me a glass and smiled politely before walking away. I stared at the water without drinking it. Then I noticed movement near the kitchen entrance again. Karen stepped inside. Emily's mother and I divorced years ago, but we had managed to stay respectful for Emily's sake. Karen always cared about appearances. She cared about nice neighborhoods, expensive clothes, and what people thought. Even when Emily was little, Karen used to say things like, "People notice these things." I never understood why that mattered so much. Karen spotted me immediately. Her face changed for a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. Surprise. Then discomfort. Then she forced a smile and walked over. "Michael." I stood up slowly. "Karen." She looked around quickly before lowering her voice. "What are you doing back here?" "Histoire de hair." I actually laughed a little because I could not believe she had asked that question. "I was brought back here." Karen looked away. Just for a second. That was all I needed. Suddenly something cold moved through my stomach. "You knew?" I asked quietly. Karen crossed her arms. "Michael, you knew?" I repeated. She sighed heavily. "Please do not make a scene today." Make a scene. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at her for several seconds without speaking. Finally, I said, "Karen, I'm sitting in a kitchen while my daughter's wedding guests are arriving upstairs." She rubbed her forehead. "Emily has been stressed." "Stressed? Ryan's family is different from us." Histoire de hair. Different. Karen shifted uncomfortably. "They have a certain image." I felt something inside me slowly changing. The pain was still there, but now something else had started appearing beside it. Confusion. Because none of this made sense. Ryan had always treated me with respect. Every time I saw him, he shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and asked how I was doing. He never acted embarrassed around me. Not once. Karen looked toward the hallway again. Just give her today, Michael. Then she said something that made me stop breathing for a second. Emily has her reasons. Her reasons. I stared at Karen while my mind tried to understand what she meant. Because suddenly this felt bigger than embarrassment. Bigger than a seating mistake. Bigger than a bad decision. Something was wrong. Really wrong. And before I could ask another question, Karen looked past me toward the kitchen doors and her expression suddenly changed. "Oh no," she whispered. I turned around. A man in a dark gray suit had just stepped into the kitchen, looking confused. Ryan. Ryan stood near the kitchen in trance, looking completely out of place among stainless steel counters and catering carts. His tie was loosened slightly, and he had the expression of someone who had been pulled in 10 different directions during the last hour. For a second, he just looked around in confusion. Then his eyes landed on me. His face changed immediately. "Michael," he said. Karen straightened beside me, so fast, it almost looked rehearsed. "Ryan, sweetheart, you should be upstairs." Ryan barely looked at her. His attention stayed on me. "Michael, what are you doing back here?" There was a long pause. I could feel Karen looking at me. I could almost hear her silently begging me not to say anything. A strange thing happens when somebody hurts you badly enough. You stop wanting to protect people. 20 minutes earlier, I probably would have covered for everyone. I would have smiled and said there had been some misunderstanding. But now I was tired. I looked at Ryan and simply said, "I was told to wait here." His eyebrows pulled together. "Wait here?" I nodded. "In the kitchen." Ryan looked around again, as if he expected hidden cameras to come out and reveal some joke. Then he looked back at Karen. "What does that mean?" Karen forced a smile that looked painful. There was some confusion with seating arrangements. Ryan stared at her. "Seating arrangements?" Karen nodded quickly. "Exactly." Ryan looked at me again, then at the chair beside me, then at the small gift box still sitting in my hand. I watched him put pieces together in his head, and I could tell immediately that none of them made sense to him. "Michael," he said slowly, "your seat is supposed to be front row." Karen spoke immediately. Too quickly. "Ryan, really, there are a million things happening right now." Ryan turned toward her. "No, wait." His voice stayed calm, but something had changed in it. "What do you mean front row?" Karen blinked. Ryan looked back at me. "I sat with Emily 3 weeks ago and finalized the seating chart myself." Silence. Absolute silence. Karen's face lost color for a second. I felt my stomach tighten, because suddenly I realized something important. Ryan did not know. Whatever this was, whatever had happened, Ryan was standing here just as confused as I was. Karen looked away and adjusted her bracelet. Plans changed. Ryan stared at her. Plans changed. Karen crossed her arms. "Ryan, today is stressful enough without creating problems." I noticed she kept using that word. Problems. Like I was some inconvenient thing that needed to stay hidden in a corner until everyone else finished enjoying themselves. Ryan looked at me again. "How long have you been back here?" I glanced toward the kitchen clock on the wall. "Maybe 25 minutes. Ryan looked genuinely shocked. 25 minutes? I shrugged slightly. I suddenly felt exhausted. "It is fine." But it was not fine. We both knew it. Ryan took a step closer. "No, it is not fine." Karen sighed loudly. "Can we please stop this?" Ryan turned toward her. "No, got in. I want to know what is happening." Karen looked toward the entrance hallway again, like she wanted an escape route. Then she lowered her voice. "Emily just wanted things simple today." Ryan frowned. "Simple?" Karen hesitated. Then she said carefully, "Some guests from my side and your side are important people." I saw Ryan's expression change instantly. It was not anger yet. It was confusion mixed with disbelief. Important people? Karen realized immediately that she had said too much. That came out wrong. Ryan stared at her for several seconds. Then he looked at me. "Did Emily know you were back here?" The question hit harder than I expected, because even after hearing her words earlier, some part of me had still been holding on to hope. Hope is stubborn. It stays alive, even when it should not. I looked down at the floor for a moment before answering quietly. "Yes." Ryan did not say anything. He just stared at me. Then he slowly asked, "She knew?" I nodded once. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. I could hear dishes clinking in the distance. Someone rolled a cart across the floor behind us. But inside our little corner near the back wall, everything felt still. Ryan ran a hand over his face. No, he laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. No, that does not make sense. I did not answer, because I'd spent the last 20 minutes thinking exactly the same thing. Ryan looked at Karen again. Please tell me I am misunderstanding something. Karen looked exhausted now, like she was tired of holding up a wall that was starting to crack. Ryan, she started. Then she stopped. Then she said something quietly. Emily has been worried. Ryan frowned. About what? Karen hesitated. About fitting in. Ryan stared at her. Fitting in with who? No answer. Karen looked away again. Ryan followed her eyes, and suddenly I saw a realization begin to appear on his face. Not complete realization, just enough to make him uncomfortable. He looked at me slowly. Really looked at me. My suit was older than most of the guests probably wore. I had polished my shoes 3 times last night because I could not afford new ones. I drove a 12-year-old truck sitting outside in the parking lot. And for the first time all morning, I wondered if Emily had looked at me and seen all of that instead of seeing her father. Ryan stood there staring at me for a few seconds. Then his eyes moved down toward the navy blue gift box in my hand. What is that? He asked quietly. I looked down. My fingers tightened around it again. I smiled a little, but felt sad. Just something I wanted to give Emily today. Ryan nodded slowly. Then his eyes moved back up to mine. And suddenly he asked a question that made my heart stop. Michael, who paid for this wedding? I stared at Ryan for a moment because I honestly did not understand why he was asking me that question. Out of everything happening around us, that was the last thing I expected him to say. Karen immediately stepped in before I could answer. Ryan, that does not matter right now. Ryan did not even look at her. His eyes stayed on me. Michael, I shifted the small navy blue box in my hands. I do not know why you are asking. Ryan frowned and glanced around like he was trying to organize thoughts that suddenly stopped making sense. Because my father just pulled me aside 10 minutes ago. He looked back at me. He said he wanted to thank me for convincing you. I blinked. Convincing me? Ryan nodded slowly. He said I should thank you for helping make this wedding happen. Karen looked like somebody had drained every drop of color from her face. She looked at Ryan and then at me and then back at Ryan again. I think there is some misunderstanding, she said quickly. Ryan finally looked at her. Then explain it. Silence. Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I looked down at the floor for a second because suddenly I knew where this was going and I did not want it to go there. I never wanted money involved. Not today. Especially not today. Ryan looked back at me. Michael, he said carefully. Did you help pay for this wedding? I let out a slow breath. I shrugged slightly. Just a little. Ryan stared at me. Karen closed her eyes. Michael, she whispered. I knew that tone. That was Karen's voice for moments when she wanted me to stop talking immediately. Years ago, she used to use it during arguments in front of Emily because she hated conflict. But I was too tired to protect everyone anymore. Ryan stepped closer. What does a little mean? I looked at the gift box again before answering. It means I wanted Emily to have the wedding she dreamed about. Ryan stared at me without speaking. I continued quietly. That is all. But that was not all, and I think we all knew it. Karen rubbed her forehead. Ryan, please. This is not the time. Ryan looked at her again. No, I think this is exactly the time. His voice was still calm, but now there was something underneath it. Something heavier. Something building. I sat down slowly in the chair behind me because suddenly I felt very tired. Ryan looked at me again. Michael, how much? I laughed softly under my breath. Not because it was funny, because sometimes people laugh when they are uncomfortable. Ryan, I said quietly. I did not want this turning into some big thing. He crouched slightly, so we were eye level. Please tell me. I stared at him for a few seconds. Then I sighed. The venue deposit. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. Okay. I nodded toward the ballroom above us. The flowers, too. Ryan did not move. I kept going because there was no point stopping now. The catering. His expression changed a little. The photography package. Ryan slowly stood back up. Karen looked absolutely frozen beside us. I looked toward the kitchen entrance while speaking. Some of the music costs. Silence. Complete silence. Ryan stared at me like he had forgotten where he was standing. I could actually see him doing the math in his head. I looked away because suddenly I felt embarrassed. Not because of the money. I never cared about that. I felt embarrassed because I knew exactly what Ryan was realizing. This wedding had not been cheap. Not even close. Ryan looked at me carefully. "Michael," he said slowly, "that is not helping a little." I looked down at my shoes. I saved for years. More silence. Then Ryan asked quietly, "Does Emily know?" I swallowed. "No." He stared at me. "She does not know?" I shook my head. "I never wanted her to." Karen suddenly looked at me. "Why would you tell him that?" she asked sharply. I turned toward her. "Tell him what?" "Everything." I stared at her in disbelief. "Karen, I am sitting in a kitchen at my own daughter's wedding." She looked away immediately. Ryan slowly looked between us. I could see more and more pieces falling into place in his head now, and he clearly did not like the picture they were creating. He looked back at me again. "Wait." His forehead tightened. "If Emily does not know." He stopped. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Does she think Karen paid?" Nobody answered. Nobody had to. Ryan took a step back. He looked at Karen, and for the first time since walking into the kitchen, his expression lost confusion completely. Now there was something else there. Disappointment. Real disappointment. Karen crossed her arms tightly. "Ryan, do not look at me like that." Ryan stared at her for several seconds. Then he looked back at me. "You worked extra shifts for this, did not you?" I did not answer immediately, because suddenly I remembered late nights, early mornings, overtime hours, empty apartments, missed weekends, missed vacations, years, years of little choices nobody notices. I smiled faintly. Parents do things. Ryan stared at me. Then his eyes slowly moved toward the small navy blue box in my hands again. "And what is inside that?" he asked quietly. I looked down at it. My fingers brushed the top gently. I smiled, but this time there was sadness behind it. Something Emily asked for when she was 8 years old. Ryan looked confused. 8. I nodded slowly. She forgot about it a long time ago. Then before Ryan could ask another question, we suddenly heard voices from upstairs. Loud voices. Guests were beginning to take their seats. And then over the speakers, someone said words that made every person in that kitchen freeze. "We are ready for the father of the bride." I think all three of us stopped breathing for a second. The voice over the speakers echoed through the walls again. "The ceremony will begin in approximately 3 minutes. We are ready for the father of the bride." Somewhere upstairs I could hear soft music beginning to play. The sound drifted through the ceiling and into the kitchen, and suddenly everything felt unreal. Ryan looked at me, then at Karen, then back at me. Nobody moved. I stared at the floor because my mind had suddenly gone completely blank. I had imagined this moment for years. I imagined standing beside Emily. I imagined offering her my arm. I imagined looking at her and saying something embarrassing that would make her laugh before we walked out together. But now all I could think about was the sentence I had heard 20 minutes earlier. "Better if nobody knows he is my dad." Karen recovered first. She looked at me quickly. "Michael, maybe you should stay here for now." Ryan turned so fast toward her that even she looked surprised. "Stay here." Karen crossed her arms. "Ryan, please think for 1 second." "I am thinking." "No, you are reacting emotionally." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "Emotionally?" He pointed toward me. "He is sitting in a kitchen." Karen lowered her voice. "People are already seated upstairs." Ryan looked around like he could not believe the conversation was real. "Karen, he is her father." "I know that." "Then why are we acting like he is some stranger who accidentally walked into the building?" Karen opened her mouth and then closed it again. I sat there quietly listening because suddenly I felt detached from everything happening around me. It was almost like watching somebody else's life. I looked at the little gift box in my hands again. I slowly rubbed my thumb across the top edge of it. 8 years old. Emily had been 8 years old when she asked for it. Funny enough, I could still remember the exact day. I remembered everything. I remembered the weather. I remembered what she was wearing. I remembered her smile. It had been a Saturday afternoon in July. Emily and I had gone to a small county fair about 40 minutes outside town. Karen had been away on a business trip, so it was just me and Emily. She wore little denim overalls and had her hair tied into two messy pigtails because she insisted she looked older that way. We rode rides, ate funnel cakes, played games I knew were designed to take money from parents. I remember spending $20 trying to win her one giant stuffed bear because she wanted it so badly. I missed every throw, every single one. Emily laughed so hard she nearly fell over. Later that day, we stopped near a jewelry stand run by an older woman. Emily stared at a silver necklace hanging on display. It was simple, small, a tiny heart-shaped locket. "Dad," she had whispered, "that is pretty." I laughed and told her, "You're 8 years old. What are you going to do with a necklace?" She looked up at me with complete seriousness. "I'm going to wear it at my wedding one day." I remember smiling. Then I asked, "Who is getting married?" She looked offended. "Me." I laughed so hard people stared at us. She crossed her arms and pouted. "I'm serious." Then she pointed at the necklace again. "Promise me you will get me something beautiful when I get married." I remember kneeling beside her and holding out my hand. "Deal." She shook it with complete seriousness. I smiled at the memory, but the smile faded quickly, because that little girl felt very far away now. Ryan's voice pulled me back into the room. "Michael." I looked up. Ryan was staring at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I blinked a few times. Yes, but I was not. Not even close. Karen looked toward the kitchen in trance again nervously. Guests are going to start wondering what is happening. Almost on cue, a woman walked past the kitchen entrance and looked inside. "Ryan," she called. "Everyone is asking where you are." Ryan looked toward her and forced a quick smile. "I will be there in a second." The woman nodded and disappeared. Then Ryan looked back at me. He looked conflicted now, really conflicted, like he was standing in the middle of two different roads and suddenly realized they went in opposite directions. He rubbed his forehead slowly. "Michael," he said carefully, "did Emily say anything to you this morning?" I stared at him for a second. I thought about telling him. I thought about repeating every word I heard outside that kitchen door. But I could not do it. Even after everything, I could not be the person who broke my daughter apart on her wedding day. So I shook my head. "No." Ryan stared at me like he knew I was hiding something. But he did not push. Then suddenly his phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen. His expression changed immediately. He looked up at Karen. "It is Emily." Karen straightened instantly. Ryan answered and put the phone to his ear. "Hey." Silence. Then his face slowly tightened. He looked at me while listening. Then he looked away. Then back at me again. He said only 4 words before ending the call. "I'm coming upstairs." He lowered the phone slowly and stared at nothing for several seconds. Nobody spoke. Finally, I asked quietly, "Ryan?" He looked at me. His face looked different now. Not confused anymore. Not uncertain. Just shocked. "Michael," he said slowly. "Emily just asked me if I'd seen the kitchen staff because apparently one of them is missing." I think that sentence hurt more than everything else before it. Not because Emily had said it herself, but because for one awful second, I realized something that had never crossed my mind before. Somewhere upstairs, my daughter was looking around for missing staff members, and somehow I had become part of that category in her mind. Nobody spoke after Ryan said those words. Karen looked down at the floor immediately. Ryan just stood there staring at me like he regretted repeating it the moment it left his mouth. I looked at him and tried to smile because I suddenly felt embarrassed for him too. "It is okay," I said quietly. Ryan looked at me like I had just said something impossible. "No," he said immediately. "No, it is not okay." His voice sounded sharper now. I could hear frustration building underneath it. He ran both hands through his hair and started pacing a few steps near the kitchen entrance. "This does not make any sense." Karen folded her arms tighter across her chest. "Ryan, stop making assumptions." He turned around immediately. "Assumptions?" He looked at her in complete disbelief. "Karen, I'm standing in a kitchen with Emily's father while guests are sitting upstairs waiting for the ceremony to start." He pointed toward me. "The man who helped pay for half this wedding is sitting beside catering carts." Karen looked exhausted now. She rubbed her temples slowly. "Please lower your voice." Ryan laughed once under his breath. "That is what you were worried about." I sat there listening while holding the small navy blue gift box against my lap. I suddenly felt very old. Not physically old, just tired. tired in a way that sits deeper than your bones. I looked around the kitchen while they argued quietly and noticed something strange. Staff members had started looking over at us. Not directly, just quick glances before looking away again. People always notice when tension enters a room. They may not know the story, but they feel it. I looked down again because I did not want anyone staring at me. Then a memory came into my head out of nowhere. Emily, at 14 years old, standing in our kitchen at home after school. She had thrown her backpack onto the floor and walked straight to the refrigerator. "Dad," she had asked, "do you think rich people know they are rich?" I remember laughing because it sounded like such a random question. I had been making grilled cheese sandwiches at the stove. "What kind of question is that?" She sat on the counter and shrugged. "I do not know. There's this girl at school, and her family has one of those giant houses with gates." I remember turning the sandwich over and asking, "So?" Emily looked down at her hands. Everyone acts different around her. I remember watching her carefully because there was something in her voice. "Do you want people to act different around you?" I asked. She thought about it for a few seconds and shook her head. "No." Then she smiled and looked at me. "I think I like normal people better." I smiled at the memory for a second. Then the smile disappeared because all I could think was that somewhere between 14 and 28 something had changed. Or maybe life had changed it for her. Maybe people do not notice it happening. Maybe it happens slowly. One little compromise at a time. One little insecurity at a time. Ryan stopped pacing and looked at me again. "Michael," he said carefully, "why are you still sitting here?" I blinked. "What?" He crouched beside me again. "After everything that happened, why are you still here?" I stared at him because honestly I had not asked myself that question. I looked down at the gift box in my hand again. Then I smiled a little. "Because I promised her." Ryan frowned slightly. "Promised her what?" I rubbed my thumb across the edge of the box. "That I would be there." He stared at me for several seconds without speaking. Karen looked away immediately. I think she remembered it too. I made that promise years ago. Emily had just started college. We were standing outside her dorm building after moving boxes all afternoon. She hugged me before going inside and suddenly said, "Dad?" I remember smiling. "Yeah." She squeezed me tighter and said, "Promise you will be there when I get married one day." I laughed and told her not to rush things because she was only 18 years old. But she had looked at me with complete seriousness. "Promise." I remember kissing the top of her head and saying, "I will always show up for you." I swallowed hard and looked at Ryan. I do not break promises. Ryan stared at me for a long moment. Then he slowly stood up. His eyes looked different now. The confusion was gone. The shock was fading too. Something else was replacing it. Something heavier. Something more certain. Suddenly a woman rushed into the kitchen wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard. She looked stressed and out of breath. "Ryan," she said quickly, "we need you upstairs right now." Ryan looked at her. "What?" The woman looked confused. "Because guests are asking questions." Ryan frowned. "Questions about what?" The woman hesitated. Then she glanced toward me and looked uncomfortable. "People keep asking why the father of the bride still has not arrived." I looked down at the floor after hearing those words because I did not know how to feel anymore. Earlier that morning, I thought the worst thing that could happen was embarrassment. Then I thought it was hearing my daughter hide me. Then I thought it was realizing I had somehow become invisible at my own child's wedding. But now there was something else. Because upstairs, people were looking for me. Not because of money. Not because of status. Not because of appearances. They were asking for a father. And somehow that hurt in a different way. Ryan looked at the woman holding the clipboard. "Who is asking?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Several people." Ryan frowned. "Who?" "Your father asked. Then your aunt asked. Then some of Emily's friends started asking too." Ryan looked surprised. "Emily's friends?" The woman nodded. People noticed there was an empty chair in the front row. Silence settled around us again. I felt something move in my chest hearing that. Empty chair. I had not even known there was a chair waiting for me. Karen looked confused now. Really confused. "What empty chair?" The woman blinked. "The father of the bride's seat." Nobody spoke. Ryan slowly turned toward Karen. Very slowly. Karen stared back at him for a second before looking away immediately. I saw it happen. I saw the moment something clicked inside Ryan's head. I think he saw it too. There had been a chair. My chair. Somewhere upstairs this entire time. Karen swallowed. Maybe they forgot to remove it. Ryan stared at her in disbelief. Forgot. Karen rubbed her forehead again. I do not know. Ryan looked at her for several seconds before shaking his head slowly. He looked tired now. Tired in the way people get when they realize they no longer understand someone standing right in front of them. The woman holding the clipboard shifted awkwardly. Should I tell everyone something? Ryan looked at me. I looked back at him and forced a small smile. Tell them there was a misunderstanding. Ryan stared at me. Michael. I shrugged slightly. People are here to celebrate today. Ryan did not answer immediately. I think he was trying to understand me. Honestly, I was trying to understand myself too, because part of me wanted to walk out. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave everything behind. But another part kept seeing Emily at 6 years old running across the front yard after her first soccer game. She had scored exactly 0 goals that season. 0. She spent most games chasing butterflies near the sidelines instead of watching the ball. But after one game, she ran toward me, smiling so hard I thought her face would split in half. Dad, did you see me? She shouted. I remember laughing and lifting her into the air. Of course I saw you. She wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, I looked for you the whole time. I sat there in the kitchen remembering that sentence because suddenly it felt important. I looked for you the whole time. Funny how children say things that stay with you forever without even realizing it. Ryan sat beside me now. Karen had stepped away near the kitchen entrance and was pretending to check messages on her phone, but I could tell she was listening to every word. Ryan stared ahead quietly for a moment before speaking. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Sure. He looked down at his hands. Why did you never tell Emily about the money? I smiled a little. Such a simple question. Such a difficult answer. Because it was never supposed to be about me. Ryan looked over. I kept staring forward. Parents do strange things. I laughed softly. We spend years trying to give our kids things we never had. I rubbed the edge of the gift box with my thumb again. Sometimes we forget they grow up. Ryan stayed quiet. I continued. I did not want Emily feeling guilty. I did not want her worrying about whether she deserved things. I looked up toward the ceiling, where soft music still played faintly through the speakers. I just wanted her to be happy today. Ryan stared at me for several seconds. Then he looked away quickly. I think his eyes had become a little wet because he suddenly rubbed his face. He stood up and took a deep breath. I need to talk to Emily. My stomach tightened immediately. No. He looked at me. Michael. I stood up slowly. Please. Ryan stared at me. You heard what she said. I shook my head immediately. Please do not do that. He looked frustrated now. Why are you protecting her? I looked down for a second before answering. Because I honestly had no good answer. Because she is my daughter. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Then suddenly we heard voices getting closer. Several voices. Loud voices. Guests. Ryan turned toward the kitchen entrance just as 2 older men walked by outside the doorway. One of them stopped suddenly and looked inside. Michael, he said. I looked up in surprise. It was Ryan's father, Thomas Brooks. He smiled warmly the moment he saw me. There you are. Then he frowned slightly and looked around the kitchen. What on earth are you doing back here? Everyone upstairs has been waiting for you. I think every person in that kitchen froze at exactly the same moment. Thomas Brooks stood in the doorway wearing a dark blue suit with a silver tie, smiling like he had just found an old friend at a family barbecue. Beside him stood another man around his age, and both of them looked confused by the strange silence waiting for them. Thomas looked at me again and laughed softly. Michael, we have been looking everywhere for you. Ryan stared at his father. Karen stared at the floor. I just stood there holding the little navy blue gift box in my hands like I suddenly forgot how to move. Thomas looked around the kitchen. Why are you standing back here? He smiled and pointed toward the ceiling. Your seat is upstairs. Nobody answered him. Nobody even tried. I saw Thomas slowly notice the expressions around him. His smile faded a little. Did I walk into something? Ryan looked at Karen. Karen looked at me. I looked down at the floor. Thomas frowned now. Ryan let out a slow breath and rubbed his face. Dad. He looked at me briefly before looking back at Thomas. There has been some confusion. Thomas blinked. Confusion? Ryan hesitated. I could see him deciding what to say and what not to say. Finally, he said, Michael was brought back here by mistake. Mistake. I noticed Ryan chose that word carefully. Karen looked relieved for half a second, but Thomas immediately frowned. By mistake. He looked around again. Who exactly makes that kind of mistake? Nobody answered. Thomas stared at all of us for several long seconds. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. He had one of those faces that looked warm and friendly most of the time, but I suddenly realized Ryan got something from him. Because when Thomas became serious, the entire room seemed to feel it. Ryan. His voice lowered. What is actually happening? Ryan looked toward me again. I shook my head very slightly. I did not want this becoming bigger. Not here. Not now. Ryan saw it immediately. He stared at me for a second, and I could tell he understood what I was asking. Do not do this. Please. But then Thomas looked at me and smiled again, although now it looked gentler somehow. Michael, I wanted to thank you before the ceremony started. I looked up in surprise. Thank me? Thomas nodded. Absolutely. He smiled. I have been trying to catch you all morning. I frowned slightly. Ryan looked confused again. Karen suddenly looked nervous. Thomas continued. When Ryan told me what you did, I told him that any man willing to quietly sacrifice for his family deserves respect. Complete silence. Ryan slowly turned toward his father. Dad. Thomas looked at him. What? Ryan stared. I never told you anything. Thomas blinked. What? Ryan shook his head slowly. I never told you about Michael helping with the wedding. Now Thomas looked confused. Really confused. Then who did? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then very slowly Thomas looked toward Karen. I watched Karen's face change immediately. Her shoulders tightened. Her eyes widened slightly. Thomas stared at her. Karen. Karen swallowed. Then she stopped. Thomas kept staring at her. Nobody rescued her. Nobody said anything. Finally, Karen looked down and spoke quietly. Emily asked me not to say anything. Ryan stared at her. Say what? Karen closed her eyes briefly. Then she looked at me. I did not think it would become this. Nobody moved. Karen looked like she wanted to disappear. Thomas crossed his arms slowly. Karen. His voice had become very calm now. Say what? Karen let out a long breath. Then she finally said it. Emily was worried. Ryan looked exhausted. Worried about what? Karen looked around the room before answering. She thought people would judge Michael. Ryan frowned. Judge him for what? Karen looked at me for a second, then away, for not fitting the image. Nobody spoke. I stared at her because suddenly hearing the words out loud felt different. Or somehow, because thoughts inside your head still leave room for doubt. Spoken words do not. Ryan looked at Karen like he had never seen her before. Thomas looked confused and disappointed at the same time. I looked down at the gift box again because suddenly I did not want anyone looking at me anymore. Then Thomas quietly said something I do not think anyone expected. Michael spent 30 minutes talking to me last month. Everyone looked at him. Thomas looked directly at Ryan while speaking. He wanted advice. Ryan frowned. Advice? Thomas nodded slowly. About retirement accounts. I looked up immediately. My stomach tightened. Thomas smiled at me sadly. You asked me how to structure things so Emily would never have to worry financially if something happened to you. Ryan slowly looked toward me. Thomas shook his head. That man sat with me for nearly an hour talking about his daughter. Nobody spoke. Thomas looked around the room once, then quietly said, So somebody explained to me why he is standing beside a dishwasher instead of beside his family. I did not think anyone had an answer for Thomas. Not a real one anyway. The room became so quiet that I could hear the low hum of the refrigerators on the other side of the kitchen. Even the employees nearby seemed to suddenly find reasons to stop moving. Thomas stood there waiting. Ryan looked at Karen. Karen looked at the floor. And I stood holding that small navy blue gift box like it suddenly weighed 50 pounds. I cleared my throat and tried to smile. Thomas, really, is not a big deal. He looked at me immediately. Michael, I did not ask if it was a big deal. His voice stayed gentle, but there was weight behind it now. I asked why. I opened my mouth and then closed it again because honestly I had nothing left. I had spent the entire morning trying to protect everyone. Protect Emily. Protect Karen. Protect the day. Protect the image people wanted. And suddenly I felt tired of holding everything together by myself. Ryan looked toward me carefully. Michael, he said quietly. Did Emily know about the retirement account? My eyes moved toward him. For a second, I forgot about everything else around me. What? Ryan glanced at his father. Thomas sighed and looked back at me. I should probably let you explain. I stared at him in confusion. Thomas smiled sadly. You told me last month that you had been putting money aside for years. I felt my stomach drop. No, not this. Not here. Thomas, I said quietly. He looked at me. Michael, I thought Emily knew. Nobody moved. Ryan stared at me. Karen stared at me. I suddenly wanted to disappear. Thomas looked surprised by the expressions around him. She does not know? I looked away. No. Ryan stepped closer. Know what? I rubbed my forehead slowly. My chest felt tight. Ryan. But Thomas spoke before I could say anything else. Michael told me he started saving after Emily was born. Ryan frowned. Thomas continued. He said he never wanted her making life decisions based on fear. Ryan stared at me without blinking. What does that mean? I swallowed hard. I looked down at the floor. There was no point hiding now. Not anymore. When Emily was born, I said quietly, I opened an account. Nobody spoke. I stared ahead while memories started returning one after another. Hospital lights. Tiny hands. The first time I held her. I remembered sitting beside Karen in that hospital room with Emily sleeping in my arms and thinking something that terrified me. Someday I would not be here anymore. Someday she would have to face the world without me. I remembered looking down at that tiny face and making a promise she never heard. I will take care of you even after I am gone. I let out a slow breath. I put money into it every month. Ryan stared at me. Every month. I nodded. Even if it was only $20. Nobody moved. I kept talking quietly because suddenly all of it was coming out. Years of things I never planned on saying. Some months it was more. Some months less. I smiled a little. There were years I barely added anything. My eyes moved toward the ceiling for a second. But I kept doing it. Ryan looked stunned. Karen slowly sat down in one of the nearby chairs like her legs stopped working properly. Thomas crossed his arms and looked at me with sad eyes. Ryan spoke softly. How much? I laughed once under my breath because I already knew where his mind was going. Numbers. Everybody always goes to numbers. But numbers were never the important part. Enough. Ryan shook his head slowly. Michael. I looked at him. Enough that she would never panic if life hit her hard one day. Silence. Absolute silence. Ryan stared at me like he had forgotten where he was standing. Karen covered her mouth with one hand. Thomas looked away briefly. I suddenly felt embarrassed again because I hated talking about things like this. I never did those things to be thanked. I never did them so people would look at me differently. I just did them because I was a father. That was it. Ryan looked at me for several seconds before quietly asking, Does Emily really not know any of this? I shook my head. No. Ryan stared at me. Why? I smiled a little, although it felt tired now. Because children are not supposed to carry their parents' sacrifices around. Nobody spoke after that. Nobody knew what to say. Then suddenly we heard footsteps moving quickly toward the kitchen. Fast footsteps. Angry footsteps. We all turned at the same time. And then Emily appeared at the entrance wearing her wedding dress, breathing hard, looking irritated before she even spoke. Ryan, what are you? She stopped. Completely stopped. Her eyes moved across the room. Ryan. Karen. Thomas. Me. Then finally the gift box in my hands. The color disappeared from her face. And for the first time all day, my daughter looked scared.